Yeah, and I would like to welcome everyone for this evening. And today, the last day for the November to Remember session. And Jerome will be the speaker today. And I would like to introduce him here. And Jerome is a professor of psychology at the University of Bolton. He did his first degree in psychology at the University of Reading, graduated in 1979. After this, he did his master degree in clinical psychology at the University of East London. Jerome then worked in the NHS for 32 years. In 1992, he became a lecturer in clinical psychology. 1997 was promoted to senior lecturer. In 2005, he obtained his PhD from King's College London. For most of his working life, Jerome has been a clinical academic. He published his first journal paper in 1985 and since then has published over 200 paper and book chapters. He has co-edited 8 books with 3 on the topics of mental health recovery. This has been one of his major research interests along with positive psychology. Jerome has worked in Bolton since September 2012. A significant landmark has been the opening of the only MSc in positive psychology in the northwest of England, which was established in 2016. Jerome's ambition are to ensure that students receive the best possible education here at Bolton and that the psychology department become one of the top 25 departments in the country. I welcome you, sir.
Right. Am I good to go, Celestine?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Sanjana, for that wonderful introduction.
Thank you, sir.
So lovely to be here. It's a difficult gig. So on the last of the 10 November to Remember sessions, to be the last person to present. And I think, I mean, obviously, Brother Celestine, we know, has got phenomenal stamina. And he's here. We expect him to be here. It's his show. Why wouldn't he be here? But I do want to pay particular credit to Sam Johnson, who is also here. Sam Johnson is the most remarkable head of school I think this university has ever seen. It's unfortunate that I have never been in her school because life might have been different if I was in her school, but I'm in a different school. And everyone that's in her school benefits tremendously from the support she gives them, including the big fella himself. So I'll come back to the big fella a wee bit later in the presentation. But tonight, I'm going to share with you the PhD journey. And the slides actually were updated, Brother Celestine, actually during the week. And did not take into account the news that I learned yesterday, which I will mention when I come to it later on. So this session really is for those who are thinking about maybe doing a PhD, for those who are actually already studying for a PhD, like Sanjana, for those who already have a PhD, like Brother Celestine, and it's the PhD journey and beyond, and what you're going to achieve after you've got the PhD. So there's an interesting question in a university. What actually defines a university academic? Would I recognize one if I saw one? Now, Sam will be angry with me for this because I think there are 3 things that differentiate university academics. The first is knowledge. You've got to have knowledge. You've got to be a specialist in your field. And the whole reason for coming to university is you're getting taught by people who know more than in your previous educational institutions. That's a taken as granted. The second thing, I'm sorry to say, is you have to have a doctorate. Now, in case you could say, well, it's all right for you to say that. Well, I didn't get mine until I was 48. So I was quite late actually getting a doctorate. And then the third thing is publications. Now, Sam will hear a lot of her staff actually saying, I don't have the time. I'm doing so much teaching. Well, Brother Celestine and I'm afraid to say, will be working all weekend because that's how you get to be a top academic. While your colleagues are watching Big Brother or on Facebook, we're actually working. And Brother Celestine, you can get emails from him at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you just so happen to wake up in the middle of the night and check your email, he never seems to sleep. And maybe next year in the November to remember, we'll have a session on the secrets of Brother Celestine and what magical potion from the forests of Nigeria he must have consumed that give him so much energy, guarana or some other exotic drink. So I'm going to talk about love first. And there are three aspects to love. The first is intimacy. And you've got to be intimate with someone. You've got to be able to tell them all the things that are on your mind that trouble you. Well, nearly all. Second, you've got to have passion. You can't be in love with someone unless you have passion. And the third thing you've got to have is commitment. You have got to be completely committed to that person. I'm going to come back to that a bit later and argue that that is what good academics have. They have this degree of love for the subject and the colleagues and the institution they work in. So many years ago, Chris Christopherson, who recently died, made a film with Ellen Bernstein called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Alice set out to go from the east coast of America to the west coast of America, and she wanted to end up in Monterey. Now, I hope Sam likes this because Sam likes movies. And the unfortunate thing for poor Alice was on the way, she meets Chris Christopherson and she falls in love and she never gets to Monterey, which is where she wanted to go, but she found love. In the PhD journey, the destination is supposedly clear. You're heading to get the PhD. That is your destination. Now, you may be unfortunate and find love in the middle and get sidetracked, but hopefully not sidetracked too much that you don't come back to it later on. So what about me? Well, Sanjana has given a bit of a potted history there. Just to expand on those points, I got my PhD in 2005. So next year, I will have had a PhD for 20 years. I was age 48 at the time. I started in Bolton in 2012. I now have 33 PhD completions. Brother Celestine, you heard it right, 33, yeah? Last year, Brother Celestine, I had 29. I've got another 2 next month, which will take me up to hopefully 35. Currently have, I think, at least 10 PhD students as Director of Studies, and probably another 10 more as second supervisor. I've had PhD examining experience. In fact, I'm off to City in St. George's on Monday to examine a PhD there. I am the chair of the Board of Studies for Higher Research Degrees, which actually supervises all the PhD at this university. And my future plans are to have 40 completions. So I need 7 more to get to 40. I want to get to that magic number at 40. In terms of my background, yes, I did my first degree at University of Reading. I was nursing assistant for a year, an assistant psychologist for a year. And then for 2.5 years, I was a trainee clinical psychologist. My first job was in a place called Kidderminster, which is south of Birmingham. And I was there for 14 months. I had to move back to London. I was at Claybury Hospital for 6 years and 9 months. And then I was at the Institute of Psychiatry for 18 years, the Maudsley for 5 years. And I've been at the University of Bolton now for 12 plus years. That's about a third the amount of time that Sam Johnson's been here. I think she's about 36 years here already. Just joking, Sam. I know it's not quite as many as 36. So that's the chronology in dates. So in 2011-12, I retired from the National Health Service and got an NHS pension. And then what happened was I actually was at home, didn't have as much money as I would have liked, so I thought I'd better get a new job. I was very fortunate to be offered a job as Professor of Psychology at the University of Bolton. Now, after my first lecture here, Sanjana, one of the students came up to me, knowing my background, and said, "Why have you come to Bolton?" Almost as if someone like me shouldn't really come to Bolton. And I said, "Well, I come to Bolton because they offered me a professorship. If the Scottish people had said, 'Come to Bonnie, Scotland, we'll make you a professor,' if they'd got to me first, I'd be in Scotland. If brothers and sisters in Nigeria had said, 'Come to Nigeria, we'll make you a professor,' I'd have gone there. But the first people to propose to me were the University of Bolton. So that's where I came, and that's where I am." So I actually tried to do a PhD unsuccessfully between 86 and 89. And the PhD was on the topic of social skills training in schizophrenia. At the time, I was working in a large mental hospital. And London had many of these large mental hospitals where people with long-term mental illnesses were incarcerated, often for decades. And once you've been in there a couple of years, you were never going to get out. And consequently, a lot of the patients didn't have communication skills. So I thought, what's a great topic for a PhD? So I thought we'd teach them these communication skills, which are actually called social skills training. However, it was the wrong topic, it was the wrong time, and it was the wrong place. And the reason it was the wrong place was I think I was the only one out of about 900 staff who was actually doing a PhD. So there was no support around, but someone being in the same position as I was. So I then, in 1992, I moved to the Institute of Psychiatry in South London as a lecturer. And in 1997, I was made a senior lecturer. Now, to be made a senior lecturer at the University of Bolton, you have to run a program. You can't be a senior lecturer unless you've got program leadership. At the Institute of Psychiatry, it was different. You had to have publications. You had to be involved in research. You had to do some teaching. You had to be involved in local clinical services. In 1997, I was called into an interview. There were 8 people in the interview. And when I walked into the interview, the first thing they said to me was, "Congratulations, you have got your senior lectureship." And then they proceeded to interview me and ask me all sorts of questions about my research. And they had a very clear message. They said, unless you get a PhD, you are never going to be higher than a senior lecturer. You will never be a reader. You will never be a professor. You need to get a PhD. So second time round, I picked a completely different topic, which was stress in mental health workers. It was the right topic, it was the right time, it was the right place. And in 2003, I had my PhD viva. I was told I needed to make major changes. Now, if you were given that decision in Bolton, you would get 9 months to make those changes. But in those days, I was given 18 months to make the changes. And I was told I needed to have another viva. Now, that particular night, my partner had prepared my favorite meal, steak and chips and sweet corn, with a bottle of champagne, expecting to celebrate. I think I was in bed for 10 o'clock. I was gutted. I'd probably say it was one of the worst moments in my life. I had never heard of anyone being asked to give another viva. I'd heard of people having to make major changes, but to give another viva, and the reason I was asked to give another viva was because I did so badly at explaining my research and in answering the examiner's questions. So eventually I got the PhD second time round. So the examiners were these two people on the left, Professor Charlie Brooker, who was a professor of nursing from Sheffield, and Professor Susan Mickey. Now, she was only Dr. Susan Mickey in those days, and it was before COVID-19, because this woman became very famous during COVID-19. And she was on the television many times talking about how we were adjusting to life with COVID-19. So she was a ferocious examiner. I was found wanting on so many different questions that she asked me. But I can tell you now, I can look at her picture without evoking symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. I feel okay looking at her now. So my two supervisors were both professors. They weren't just any professors, these were very top professors. So Professor Elizabeth Kuipers, one of the top clinical psychologists in the country, as was the other supervisor, Professor David Hemsley. Now, the only photo, unfortunately, I can find of Dave is a photo with his granddaughter. He's one of these characters that seems to have avoided Google, and you can't find any images of him. And I had a couple of mentors, and everyone needs mentors. I'm sure Professor Celestine has mentors, and maybe one day he'll tell us who the mentors are. But my main mentor then and since has been the top guy there, Professor Kevin Gurney. The man underneath him is Dr. Frank Holloway. Since I came to Bolton, Professor Gurney has become more and more my mentor. I'm still in touch with Dr. Holloway, but Professor Gurney has been more of my mentor. So this is a slightly complicated slide, and you'll see what I mean by Dr. Celestine Wendy. I now have to say in public that he is now Professor Celestine Wendy. So, Brother Celestine, I apologize that I didn't manage to change the slide in time, but the figures were taken on November the 12th. We're now, what's my watch saying, November the 15th. So 3 days ago. Oh, thanks for that. Sam Johnson is clapping me, and I think she's really clapping Brother Celestine. So there we are, a picture of, that was one of the conferences, I think the first conference that Brother Celestine organized. And that's a picture of the two twin brothers together, actually. So Professor A isn't either of us. Professor A is a professor who has now retired and is 82 or 83. So the top line is his performance in 2024. So he has 230 outputs on Scopus. His H index is 47. He has 7,829 citations. 7,829 citations. Then the figure underneath is what his score was in 2023. And he had 227 outputs. So in the last year, he has produced 3 papers. Yeah, 3 papers in the last year. But his H index has actually gone up by 2, and his citations have gone up by over 500. I spotted him in the library about a year ago, and I said, "What on earth are you doing in the library?" He said, "I'm working on another paper." I said, "Why can't you just go off and retire and make it easier for the rest of us to catch you?" So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 12 months he publishes even more. So that is me there for 24. I have 217 outputs. In the history of this university, I am now the second most prolific person in terms of outputs. Now, if our brother, Professor Hollins, was here, he'd say, "You're not the most prolific in terms of grants, because I have brought in millions of pounds to this university." And that's why I'm mentioning it, Brother Paul, because no one doubts you have the Midas touch when it comes to grants. And so does Professor Candola. They have brought in millions of pounds to this university in terms of grants. but in terms of academic outputs, I am number 2. Last year, at this time, I had 202 outputs. So in the last 12 months, I have produced 15 outputs, just in 1 year. That is more than some department total score. And that is a sad indictment of how we are not producing enough research. So the third person is Prof B, and the fourth person is Dr. I, who it should be Prof I, and next year it will be Prof I. Now look at that. Last year, Professor Iwendi had 128 publications. This year, he's had 163. He has produced 35 journal papers in the last 12 months. Look at his H index, it's already 37. His citations, 4,224, almost twice as many as me. So if you've got your calculator, you can work out in a couple of years, he will be the #1 honcho here in terms of publications. And I will go back to being number 2, and I've been number 2 for a long time. But in a place like Bolton, I am actually a big fish in a small pond. And if you look at my waistline there, you can see I've got a bigger and bigger fish as the years have gone on. Now, if I wasn't here, but I was at Liverpool Hope, I'd be the second top researcher there. If I was at Chester, I'd be the second in Chester. At Cumbria, I would be number 2. At Edge Hill, I would be number 4. At UCLan, I'd be number 12. At MMU, I'd be number 18. Liverpool John Moores, I'd be number 27. At my old place of employment, King's College London, sadly, I would be number 265. And if I walked down the road to Manchester and offered to go there on a free transfer, they'd say, well, I'm afraid we don't need you, my friend. You would be number 282. So actually, really, both Brother Celestine, Professor Celestine, and myself are big fish in an actual small pond. In a bigger pond, we would be very small fish. It's important to keep that in perspective, that we're only as good as the area we're actually working in. So, getting a PhD. What do you need to do to get a PhD? You don't really need to make a major discovery to get a PhD. You just need to show you're doing good enough research independently. So a key ingredient is a thesis with a coherent overriding story or argument that embodies a research insight. And people talk about a golden thread, a thread that runs through your thesis. It needs to be situated in existing knowledge. It needs to be a critical review of previous research, which motivates and justifies the research question. You need to be contributing something new. You need to make a significant original contribution to knowledge. And there needs to be an appropriate voice and argument, the provision of clear and explicit evidence, substantiation, and chain of inference. So a good PhD is based on an honest report of research that reflects sound practice and well-articulated critical thinking. So there are now several different types of PhD. So most of you will know about the traditional research-based PhD. So I have been either director of studies or second supervisor for 20 successfully completed traditional research PhDs. We also have here at Bolton a PhD by publication. And I have been director of studies for 6 people who have got PhDs by publication. For people who have worked in the field for years and brought in innovations in practice and have changed the professional practice of the profession they're in, we have this PhD by professional practice retrospective, and I have 7 of those completions. And then we also have a professional doctorate and also an educational doctorate, which can be multidisciplinary and are to do with work-related research projects. The only problem with them is they take 6 years. So clearly, it's better to do one of the routes 1 to 3. Doing route 4 is going to take you a much longer period of time. So, as in anything in life, what is your motivation? What is your motivation? Do you really want to do a PhD? Why do you want to do a PhD? What are your reasons for doing one? What topic do you want to research? Is it going to sustain you for 3 years? So the first topic I chose didn't sustain me. So clearly I made the wrong choice, but I went back some years later and I chose a topic that I'd already published quite a bit of work in. So it was a bit easier to do something when I was already publishing work in that field. Doing a PhD can be a very lonely process. And you could refer to it as the loneliness of the long distance runner. The book by Alan Salito, a very famous book, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. And doing a PhD is a bit like that. It takes years. As in life, peer support is critical. It is, in fact, life support. So, of course, your director of studies, your second supervisor are very, very important. But the most important resource you will have is other PhD students, because they're the only people that are actually going through what you are going through. And in life, that is vital. To have someone that's doing the same things as you, because you're able to share the difficulties with each other. So we try and make it a little bit easier. We had for a while, we haven't had one for a little time. Coffee and cakes for some of the PhD students. We had skills and spills within psychology. And this year we had our annual psychology PhD workshop, the second PhD workshop within psychology. And hopefully next year we'll have our third one. And hopefully this will be an annual event. So it gives our own PhD students and some of our staff the chance to stand up in the Wilson, previous Freudian slip. That was the lecture theatre at the Institute of Psychiatry, in the Dean lecture theatre, and get a feel for what it's like presenting a conference paper. Now, this is someone who means a lot to Sam, because Sam appointed her a number of years ago here, over 12 years ago. This is Tara Brabazon. Tara Brabazon is an Australian academic. Most of you will never have heard of her, but she actually has done a series of really, really helpful YouTube videos on different aspects of the PhD process. I do not believe there is any other academic in the world who has done as much for PhD students as Professor Brabazon. So I'd really recommend you look at her YouTube videos. Now, she gives 10 tips when choosing your PhD supervisor. A key predictor of a good supervisor is someone with a successful track record of completions. So if you've got a supervisor who only has one completion or even no completions, it's going to be a bit harder for you than going with a supervisor that has got many completions. Choose your own supervisor. Don't let the institution choose one for you. You're going to be spending a lot of time with a supervisor, so you need to make sure you pick the right person. In some institutions, supervisors with star quality can be distant. How much time are they away? I mean, when I worked at the Institute of Psychiatry, some of the professors were so popular internationally, they were away for about half the year. So you're not going to get the supervision you want if your supervisor is always traveling to other countries. Find a supervisor who will protect you from the bureaucracy. I don't think so, Tara. I don't think there's that much bureaucracy. Does your supervisor write anything independently? Well, one of the things that Professor Wendy and I do is, if you look at our publications after tonight, you'll see we write most of our papers with other people, because that's what most good researchers do. They work with other researchers. So there are very few papers that I actually have written independently. Most of my research is research carried out by my undergraduate project students, my master's students, or my PhD students. Occasionally with colleagues, but generally my PhD students are the most productive people I write with. Be wary of co-supervisors. Tara, I disagree with this, because actually a second supervisor can be a godsend. So some of my own students have a second supervisor who is Dr. Kanangara. Dr. Kanangara was my PhD student, arrived here from Sri Lanka in June 2013. 11 years later, she's the University Director of Research Quality. The woman is brilliant. The woman looks at things completely differently to me. So having her in the supervisory team is an asset. So Tara, I'm sorry. Co-supervisors are helpful. A supervisor active in your area of research can turbocharge it, because they're already publishing in the field. They know the sorts of things that are going to get published. Teaching during your PhD will help prepare you for an academic career. If you decide that you want to be an academic, then actually getting teaching experience, and you go to the heads of school like Sam and say, oh, could I do a session, Sam, for the third year students on subject X? And you won't find a better person to approach than Sam Johnson, because she's given lots of people their first experience at teaching. Weekly supervision is essential. Again, I would say probably fortnightly supervision is essential, but it depends where you are in your journey. Do not choose a supervisor who needs you more than you need them. I'm disagreeing with Tara about this one as well, because I think I've had a couple of students who I probably needed more than they needed me, and I've benefited hugely from them. What a terrible thing to admit, Sam. What a terrible thing to admit. But I've had some amazing PhD students who it has been a pleasure to work with them. So some top tips. Read, read, read. Read, read, read. Yes, you've got to do plenty of reading. Write, write, write. Plenty of writing. Keep an annotated bibliography. Make sure you write down in detail or put on your computer all the references you've actually looked at. Make sure they're complete. I'm examining a PhD at the City and St George's University on Monday, and I went through all the references last night, and there are about 3 references that are incomplete. And not only that, but I think there are probably at least another 100 references that are not correctly notated. Now, I have marked my script to be able to give to the student, so the student's going to be able to fix it very easily. But the fewer of those errors you make, the more professional it looks. So do the work. Form an informal committee of helpers. My PhD student, Shahar, who's well known to Professor Wendy. In fact, I think Sam has probably had to tell him to stop trying to poach her off me, because she is so amazing. She will sit in the library with 2 other PhD students, and they'll work together. Now, they've been telling me, Brother Celestine, that they've been working on, they've been doing systematic reviews together. But I see an awful lot of photos of them in the gym or on the climbing wall, and I'm beginning to wonder why I haven't seen any of those reviews yet. So I think they've been partaking in sporting activity more than they've perhaps been doing the systematic reviews. Expose your work. Present your work whenever you get a chance to present your work. because you'll get used to people asking you questions. And that's what's certainly going to happen in the Viva. You're going to have a minimum of 2 hours of answering questions. And sometimes some people can get 4 or 5 hours. So there's a lot of questions to answer. So make sure you're able to deal with questions that you could be asked about your PhD. So what? Learn to ask the other questions. What does it mean? Is it what you've done? Is it important? Does it pass the so what test? We've got to convince the people reading our work that we've actually done some exceptional work. Don't hide from the supervisor. Always seek your supervisor out. Even if you haven't done anything between the sessions, supervisor isn't going to throw you out of the office. The supervisor is going to want to try and find out what's happening. Can they help you? Always make backups of your work. I always say to people, make sure all your work is on the university server. The university server is the safest place to put your work. And the reason it is because the university cannot afford for the server to go wrong. Because otherwise we aren't in business. If we lost all our work from the server, and I see Brother Ike has joined us. What the most wonderful smile this side of Nigeria from Brother Ike. Brother Christian's on holidays. We never see Brother Christian on a Friday, do we? I think he doesn't. He's in Scotland on Fridays. Right. Read at least one thesis cover to cover. The Ethos website has all the theses. Now, there was a bit of a problem with the British Library recently. They were hacked. But yeah, have a look at other PhDs. Get a sense of what they actually look at. At the end of the day, it is a pass or a fail. Fortunately, very few people fail PhDs. And if you do fail PhDs, then you've got to ask questions of your supervisors, because your supervisors should make sure you go into that Viva and we're confident you're going to pass, you're going to get your PhD. So what are your supervisors expecting from you? Well, they expect you to be independent. You know, you've done your undergraduate, you might have done a master's, they're expecting you now to be an independent scholar. They expect you to produce work that is not just a first draft, but that you put quite a bit of work into. They expect to have regular meetings with you. They expect you to be honest when you're talking about your progress. They expect you to follow their advice, especially when you've asked for it. They expect you to be excited about your work, able to surprise them and fun to be with. There is no academic relationship quite like that of a PhD supervisor and their student. With BSc projects, you have students for one academic year. Well, 2 semesters basically, unless they come to you at the end of their second year. MSc projects, 18 months. At most, 22 months. PhD supervision is much more intense and lasts for a minimum of 3 years. Some marriages don't last that long. So we're talking about an intense relationship here, yeah? And what would you expect from your supervisor? I was privileged to have, as head of department, I arrived at the Institute, Professor Geoffrey Gray. Professor Geoffrey Gray was an amazing man. He was fluent in Farsi. He came from the East End of London. He married a Persian princess. And really he probably worked in the intelligence services. He had been a senior lecturer at Oxford, and he came across to the Institute as Professor of Psychology. And he followed in the footsteps of Professor Hans Ising, who was a German psychologist who left at the start of all the trouble in Germany in the 1930s, came to England, and became the most famous psychologist of his generation. He was never given a fellowship of the British Psychological Society because his views were too controversial. In fact, they've asked for a number of his papers to be retracted because of concerns about the collaboration with a German psychologist. To my dying day, I will regret the fact that at heads of department meeting, when they talked about this, and they said 30 of his papers had been retracted, that I stayed silent and I didn't say, does that mean the other 530 papers are okay? Because he was one of the most prolific psychologists everywhere. An amazing man. I once got into the lift with him, and he was so amazing. There are at least 3 biographies written about this guy. And I got into the lift with him, and I looked in his eyes, and I said, Professor Ising, I read in Gibson's biography that when you were an undergraduate student, you published 6 papers. Is that correct, sir? And he said, yes, that's correct. I did as an undergraduate. And I said to him, it must have been very easy to get published in those days. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, well, you know, nowadays there are so many different journals. I suppose it balances out. So he was agreeing it was easy to get published in those days, but saying it's just as easy to get published these days. So when the famous professors left the Institute of Psychiatry, they had a portrait painted of them, and this is a portrait of Professor Kevin Gurney, who I spoke to as recently as last night. I first met him in 1993 at a Claybury conference. I went to the University of Middlesex when he gave his first inaugural professorial lecture there. And I saw his inaugural professorial lecture at the Institute of Psychiatry. And I went to his Festschrift when he actually retired from the Institute of Psychiatry as well. I managed to persuade him to allow me to do a living tribute to him, in which 12 academics wrote about their experience of working with him. And I still have continued academic contact with him. He's probably one of the most remarkable academics I ever met in my life. And he is a treasured friend as well. And I'm blessed to have him in my life. So let me sort of, as I wind down, begin to quote you something from the film Patch Adams. All of life is a coming home. All the people of the world, all trying to find a way home. As Dante put it, in the middle of the journey of my life, I found myself in a dark wood, for I had lost the right path. Eventually, I would find the right path, but in the most unlikely place. And I have found that path in Bolton. So let me go back to love. So intimacy. You are going to have intimate relationships at an academic level, Sam, with your colleagues and your students. You have to have a passion for the subject. You've got to show a passion for the subject. And you have to have a commitment to your students and the institution you actually work in. You have to be totally committed. So here are 2 of my PhD students. Jan McFarland on the left published her first book with me last year, Positive Psychology for Healthcare Professionals. On my right is Dr. Barry Green. He's a visiting research fellow. And since he got his PhD, he's published a number of journal papers. Both these people got their PhDs just after their 60th birthday. So it's never too late to get a PhD. This slide is all the presenters that we had at a conference recently. And this conference, Shifting Perceptions, Breaking the Stigma, about stigma towards mental health problems in South Asian communities, was based on the research of Aisha Shahama, who is in the bottom left. And it was her research, and it was her research that brought all these amazing people together for a conference that we had at the University of Bolton. This is the first time, I believe, Brother Celestine, that an entire conference has been arranged around one PhD student's work. A phenomenal achievement. Brother Celestine mentioned a little bit earlier Professor Mohammed. And Professor Mohammed had a conference in London at Ernst & Young. This was a conference on financial fraud. And it was on about the 9th floor of Ernst & Young. And just behind, out the window there, I think that is the Tower of London that you can actually see. So what an amazing place to have a conference. So we had it there because he is closely linked with the accountants Ernst & Young. What he didn't know was the chap on the left is my son, Patrick. And my son, Patrick, is an actuary with Ernst & Young. So he was able to attend the conference. Not only did he attend the conference, Brother Celestine, which Brother Ike spoke at, he actually asked a question. And I couldn't believe it. To be in a conference and my own son is asking a question. And that was one of the proudest moments of my life. And he's actually wearing, Sam, a lanyard which says neurodiversity. Yeah. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Danielson, said to me, "Oh, your son's neurodiverse. I didn't know that." And I said to her, I said, "Alicia, my son isn't neurodiverse. My son is a genius. I don't look at him as neurodiverse. I look at him as someone who has got amazing talent." You know, so there is an ability in every disability. There is an ability in every disability. And there he is with my amazing Shahar. What a meeting that was to have my son meet one of my best ever PhD students. So, a love of research. Well, my problem is I've got 6 loves. Now, before Sam gets worried, the loves are mental health recovery, Sam, positive psychology, autoethnography, alcohol addiction, bereavement, and positive aging. Now, given I'm now 65, Brother Celestine, 67. Oh, bloody hell, 65. What am I talking about? I'm 67. No wonder I'm interested in bereavement. I'm interested in positive aging. And these trends have happened over more recent years as one begins to look towards God's waiting room, or some people refer to it as Sniper's Alley. But I know the best days of my life physically are behind me. But I can always look at Sam Johnson, who's still running around Bolton like a 21-year-old. So it shows the benefits of positive fitness for health. So you have all got to ask yourself the question, where are you going to go? And wherever you go, whatever that destination is, you need to go boldly. You need to finish that PhD and go beyond it and think, where to now? And if you look at the stars there, I think when Brother Celestine lies in bed at night, he looks out the window and he sees the stars and he thinks, what wonderful things am I going to make happen? And how blessed are we within 24 hours to be able to say to our amazing colleague, Brother Celestine, congratulations on being a professor. It's richly deserved. I count myself privileged to be considered a friend, and enjoy these moments, brother, because they are richly, richly, richly deserved. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sanjana.
Thank you, Professor. Your speech really is amazing. It is giving a motivation for the people who wanted to do PhD, and whoever is doing PhD now. It's really motivation. Thank you so much. And any questions from any of you? So thank you so much, sir. I would like to hand over the session to Celestine sir now.
I don't know why people don't want to ask questions. Everybody is becoming very emotional. Okay. Yeah. Is Uche Chukwu answering question? Uche, you want to ask? You just unmute
No,
your mic.
yeah, no, I'm just clapping for a wonderful session, and presentation we got there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We hand over back to Sam. Sam is here. So let Sam take over. Can you elaborate more on about the PhD by publication? Also, okay. There's a question on PhD by publication. Someone wants to take that route. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good route, but it's not as easy as people perhaps think. If you already have quite a few publications, then it's probably a good route to go down if those publications are on a related theme. There is a book on doing a PhD by publication in the social sciences by Nygaard and Sully, and it gives you 5 criteria for doing a PhD by publication. We insist at this university that your publications must be cited in Scopus. So they need to be good publications. They need to be mainly your work and not the work of a team. So if you're in a team, the senior member of that team needs to specify what percentage of that paper was due to your own efforts. But it is a route. It's a good route to go down. And I think we're going to see more and more PhDs by publication. And in fact, of course, that's a great thing for you because it gets your work out there into the field. Thank you for the question. Oh, Sam.
Hi,
That's
Jerome.
not clapping.
Thank you so much for that talk, and we'll say a few words about that shortly. But I mean, from my experience of observing yourself and Professor Celestine and other colleagues, so you've talked about the the core importance of the relationship between the supervisor and the PhD student, and it's just I think so much depends upon mutual trust and mutual respect. And yet in academic circles, those sort of words aren't always used. You know, it's about intellect, it's about resilience, it's about hard work, spending hours in the library. But that trust and respect make all the difference in terms of getting students across the finishing line, because our supervisors put faith in us, and that motivates us to move us forward, even in the most difficult times. How do you go about motivating your students towards and establishing that relationship of trust and respect, or any other colleagues that are on the call? I mean, how do you go about building that relationship?
Well, I think you build that relationship by treating your students with respect, and by actually, I remember hearing Brother Christian saying that he always bought his students coffees, you know. So you guarantee you get a coffee out of Brother Christian. It's I think giving students time, and also being interested in their life outside their studies as well. Because particularly for students from overseas, they're often dealing with lots of other problems in their lives. And, you know, our job, we're primarily academics. That's our prime purpose. But we also have to be sensitive to the difficulties that people are having and support them through those difficulties.
I think it's also very important to note that it is how do I use that word? You know, not something you should be expecting, because you can have some students who feel, you know, it is compulsory that my supervisor must provide me this, you know. I'm trying to use that best word for it. It has to be, you know, gesture of the supervisor, you know, that the supervisor is trying to make that, especially when you just have to meet your supervisor once in a month anyway. But if the supervisor is trying to bring that relationship, the problem sometimes is when you are trying to do that relationship, like I had it with a student, and then it becomes like, okay, you must do this for me. There's a best word, we normally use it. Like I deserve this. No, you only deserve by that commitment. And it is that commitment that will help supervisor will feel for you. I have Larry that works with me. He knows so many things I do. And when we go out to eat, and then you do so many other things. It's not that it's compulsory, you have to do it. The university does not give any supervisor extra money to take care of anybody. When you pay your fees, it goes to the university. We only paid our fees. We just paid our salary. But we do all this to make them feel that we can also be a pastor to the students, and make them achieve their aim, because it's a pride to see that they get to the top also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Professor Celestine, there's a final question there about how can PhD students effectively network and position themselves for academic or non-academic career opportunities post-graduation. Well, that's right, you have to network. So the most brilliant networker I've ever seen is one of my Indian PhD students, Mahimna Vyas, who did his master's here and went back to India and is doing his PhD in India. Now, he goes to a couple of conferences, and when he goes to conferences, he asks, can he help out? And if he helps out, he gets reduced fees, and he gets to meet the academics. So he knows more academics globally than I know. It's absolutely amazing. You have to make the effort yourself. You have to put yourself forward. If you don't, how else are they going to know you? Volunteer to help out. When Professor Celestine, he's got a big conference next year, 4th and 5th of August. That's going to be a mega conference. Make sure you're there. Can I help out in any way, Professor Celestine? You'll get to meet lots of people. Speak to them. Unless you approach them, they're not going to approach you. You have to put yourself forward. Now, obviously, your supervisor will also try and introduce you to these people, but you've got to make an effort also. Okay, so Professor Celestine, I've left all my guests in the restaurant.
Yes, I know.
To come and give the presentation. So I've got to go back to pay
just a minute before you run away. Sam.
Yes.
I know it's very loaded now.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very, very much, Jerome, for, as ever, a very enlightening, a very inspirational talk. I think, I'm sure everybody on the call today and those people that know you know, you're amazingly generous, both intellectually and in terms of the support and compassion you offer colleagues and students alike. So I'm sure everybody here will want to say a huge thank you for your time here on a Friday evening to culminate this fantastic series of a November to Remember talks. And just to finish off there, we first of all, we have an award. Do we have an award for Professor Jerome that we can put on the screen?
Yes, we have.
Yes. So thank you very much, Jerome, for giving your time and sharing your expertise and experience to all of us, with all of us this evening. And then if we could go back to full screen again, that would be absolutely fantastic. I just want to say a huge thank you, of course, to Celestine, to Professor Celestine, as he now is, and to all of those colleagues and guests who've graced this series of November to Remember. Unfortunately, I've not been able to attend them all. The ones I have attended have been absolutely fantastic, cutting edge. And we have experts from around the world, but also our experts here in Bolton who are here to support us and share their knowledge. So it's been a fantastic series. And thank you most of all, perhaps, to our wonderful, wonderful students, who've supported this whole series and who make all the business of our lives worthwhile. That's why we are here, for our students. So thank you all very much. Thank you for a fantastic series, Celestine. Thank you to Professor Jerome. What a lovely, lovely talk to end the series. And have a lovely weekend, everybody, and take care. Go forth and research. Go forth and become PhD students.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to stop the slide now, but if you want to collect your certificates today, just wait 3 minutes. We need your emails, and then we'll get it done to you. It's ready. So we want to make sure you go, but please post them on LinkedIn, make noise about this program. The videos is also out on our YouTube pages, so you also get the link. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Professor Jerome, and thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Professor. Thank you.